We're going to be continuing our series this morning on the seven churches with a look of the church in Smyrna this morning and the interesting congregation that meets there. Like to just kind of give you again by means of review. Do believe that the Revelation written around 95, again after the establishment of the churches and the fall of the temple in Israel. And I think that's going to be very important to where I'd like to see us go this morning. Also, the human author is John the Apostle, despite the fact that the book never says, "I'm John the Apostle, how are you today?" And also that the main problem faced by the early church was the problem of the trade guild. Also like to add to that I do fully believe that the revelation was understood by the churches that received it. I don't think that they needed to send out for some special service to decode that. I think they understood what Jesus was saying to them through the Apostle John. So with that in mind, I'd like to kind of begin with this thought. Years and years, well, I can't say years and years ago. It's been decades now. Decades ago, I was in a Stephen Covey seminar. Anybody remember that name, Stephen Covey? The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And the person that was conducting the seminar, we didn't rate Stephen Covey himself. We had a trainer, and the trainer took out this jar, a big jar, kind of like you make iced tea in, put it on the counter, and took out these rocks, golf ball, baseball size rocks, put them in the jar. Said, "Is the jar full?" How many of you are familiar with this, have seen this at one time or another? All right, so is the jar full? And the people said, "Yes, the jar is full." And so the person reached under the counter and took out a jar of gravel, and poured it in there, and the gravel filled the spots in between the big rocks and said, "Is the jar full?" And the people said, "Yes." So the presenter took out a jar of sand and said, poured the sand in there, and the sand filled the spaces between the pieces of gravel and said, "Is the jar full now?" And we, the people, said, "Yes." And then the presenter took out some water and poured it in there, and then it overflowed with water. And the presenter said, "Is the jar full now?" And because we'd learned our lesson, we all said, "No, you can surely fit some." No, she's like, no, it really is full now, right? We've run out of stuff. And she said, what's the lesson of the jar? What's the lesson of the jar? And people said, "Well, you can always fit something else in, right? If you just shake it just right, that's the lesson of the jar." And those of you who've had the lesson of the jar, the presenter said, "No, that's not the lesson of the jar. The lesson of the jar is put the big rocks in first. You put into the jar first the things that are of the highest priority. Because if you start with the sand, right, if you start with the gravel, if you start with the water, if you start with something that's time-consuming, that may be fun, but it's not crucial, if you start with those things, then you'll never be able to fit in the things that are the most important to you." And I'd like to kind of keep that thought in the back of our minds as we jump in to the church in Smyrna, the second church that Jesus speaks to in the Revelation. Interestingly enough, or coincidentally, I'm not going to make too big of a point of it, but there we go. Is that better? Okay, excellent. I'm not going to make too big of a point from it, but Smyrna comes from the same Greek word from which we get myrrh, right? Gold, frankincense, myrrh. This is the one of the gifts that the Magi brought to Jesus as a child. And in the ancient world, myrrh was used, had two main uses. It was used as a perfume, but it's also like first century ibuprofen. It was anti-inflammatory. right? Has anti-inflammatory properties. So it was dual used for that. Don't know if there's a connection, but it's possible. I just point that out as a point of interest as we take a look at some other important details about the Smyrna as a community, right? First of all, it's extremely prosperous harbor city, big trade center, had access to the Aegean Sea and the Hermus River, which means that not only could goods and services be received from other seaports, but it could also go inland, right? It would be a city that like what we have today that might give access to the Atlantic Ocean and to the Great Lakes, or like in Louisiana, where you have access to the Gulf. I guess we now have difference of opinion as to what we call that Gulf, but that Gulf that you know of which I speak, and then the Mississippi River, right? So you can go either direction. You can go into the Gulf, or you can go inland up the Mississippi. And so Smyrna was that type of a city. You can go out, you can come in. So that made them quite prosperous. Also, because the location, it was the center of pagan worship. Had temples to Cybele, the mother of Zeus, the Aphrodite, goddess of love, Asclepius, the god of health, which takes the form of a snake, right? Which is one of the reasons why today the medical signia has snakes on it, right? Goes back to the idea of the Greek god of healing, Asclepius. And I remember I taught this lesson, taught that idea in a Bible class years and years ago. And then later my wife and I had gone to see the movie. Not sure what it was, because we don't go all that often, but we're in the movie theater, and they're doing before the movie starts, they're showing one of those slide shows, where the different things pop up on the screen for you to watch before. How many familiar with this? Right? Nobody? Just on 3? Okay, 4. It's starting to spread now, awareness. These slides come up on the screen advertising different things while you eat your popcorn and have your soda waiting for the film to start. And so an ad for a medical training school came up, and that insignia appeared on the screen. And one of my students, whom I did not know was in the front row, yelled out at the top of his lungs, "Hey, that's Asclepius!" And I felt proud and embarrassed all at the same time. Also had temple to Apollo. Had a large Jewish population. However, this Jewish population, by the time we get to the writing of the Revelation, mid-90s AD, the Jewish population in Smyrna is extremely hostile to the Christian faith. A couple of reasons for that. One is that when Christians had first appeared on the scene, what did we say about ourselves? Did we say we have this new religion? Did Christians say that coming out of the gate? We have a new religion. Is that what the Christian message was? The day after people said, "I saw Jesus resurrected," did we say we have a new religion? No. What was the claim? We are all Jews, are we not? We are all Jews, and Jesus is the Jewish Messiah and has come to save us all from right? That was the initial claim. And it kind of continued that way, that Christians and Jews kind of continued to be similar in nature until the Jewish War of the 70s, not the 1970s, the 70s, when the nation of Israel declared war on Rome, because that'll be a good idea. And they lost that war, but while that war was being fought, Christians now said, no, we're Christians, right? There's this distinction, and as a result, Christians had not joined in the revolt against Rome, and that would become a sticky wicket later. Also was a site of voluntary emperor worship. Now, when emperor worship first introduced itself into the Roman Empire, it's a voluntary thing. Some people come up with the clever idea. I got a great idea. Let's worship the emperor. It had been just a voluntary kind of thing. But under Domitian, it became mandatory. Every citizen of the empire had to do this. On a side note, Smyrna had picked the right side in every political dispute of a major nature that exhibited itself in the Roman Empire. And so when you pick the right side, are there not rewards that follow? To the victor go the spoils, right? And so Smyrna received spoils upon spoils upon spoils upon spoils for backing the right movement every time a movement presented itself. Now, just to give you it's also modern day Izmir, the third largest city in Turkey, and that's how it's spelled now. And so here's a quick map. And you can see the 7 churches in Asia Minor, but you can also see that the island of Patmos is off the coast, equivalent in sea travel to about the distance between any 2 of the churches. Right, does that make sense? So when John is in exile, he's not that far geographically from the churches that he's writing to. Make sense? Here's a more clear view. We don't have Patmos in this view, but you can see that the churches are relatively close together. I think that the average distance is somewhere between 20 and 25 miles between each one. Now, if you're a marathon runner, that's not a big deal. You can be there in a day. If you run like me, go a week. Just saying. So there's our backstory. There's Smyrna. And Jesus speaks to John and says, "And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life." Jesus introduces himself with resurrection. I am the one who died and came to life. The resurrection is crucial to the understanding of the gospel message. It's central to Christian theology, and I will submit to you that it's also central to Christian ideology. I don't know that it's possible to be a Christian and say, well, Jesus never died and he never rose. Well, then what's the aspect of faith to which we cling, right? Do we not cling to the redemptive work of the power of the cross? And do we not also claim that that redemptive work is validated because Jesus walked out of the tomb to the presence of innumerable witnesses? Isn't this what we commemorate and we acknowledge every year during Holy Week? Jesus suffered, Jesus died, Jesus rose. They are inseparable. And that's where John begins here. The words of the first and the last, again, echoing back to chapter 1, that Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Jesus is claiming equality with God once again and gives mention to the fact, I'm the one who died and I'm the one who's risen. And then we have this interesting description of the condition of the believers in Smyrna. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. Isn't that an interesting statement? Obviously, Jesus mentions it because it's relevant, yes. But imagine if you came into the service this morning and that's how I greeted you. I know your tribulation and I know you're broke. Isn't that kind of an odd greeting? An odd conversation starter. Why does that become an issue? I know your tribulation, I know your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. That's a powerful indictment. I know you. I know the difficulty that you're living under. I know your financial status. And I know that the ones who are accusing you are coming from among this group of Jews who have somehow embraced secular living and are now making it business to persecute this relatively young Christian movement. I know what's going on, Jesus says through John. But do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison. How does John know that? Go with Captain Obvious. Where's John when he writes the letter? In exile on Patmos for being a Jesus worshiper. He's experiencing what he knows is going to happen to more of his brothers and sisters in Christ. The devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested there. And for 10 days you'll have tribulation. 10 days. What's up with 10 days? We don't know for certain. There are some that believe that the 10 days refers biblically. Daniel uses the term 3 times in chapter 1, verses 12, 14, and 15, when he's doing that famous deal where let's put the diet to the test. Eat the rich king's food. No, we'll eat our food. Oh, you need to eat the rich food of the king. No, let us eat our food for 10 days. Come back after 10 days. After 10 days, check us out and see who's the most healthy, which I guess tells you how quickly a McDonald's diet will cause us adverse harm. After 10 days, the inspectors come back, find that Daniel and his friends are in fantastic shape, and declare you can continue to eat the foods that you want to enjoy. 10 days. Now, it may be a reference back to that. It may just be a figure of speech for a short period of time. Now, when we're little, we think 10 days is forever. When we're older, 10 days seems like yesterday almost, right? It's also possible that 10 days is symbolic language for the past 10 emperors. There had been 10 emperors from following Augustus through Tiberius, through Domitian. The current emperor that they were under at the time was emperor number 10 in that sequence. And persecution, arrests, trials, etc. had come and gone during that time. They would start to taper off with the end of Domitian's reign. And so it's possible that the author is saying, it's coming to an end with the 10th of the 10th bad emperors. Interestingly enough, in the Greek language, there's also 2 words for poverty. There's like broke, poor, and then there's like abject poverty. And that's the word that's used here. These Christians are in abject poverty. The Christians in Smyrna are living in one of the richest cities in the empire, but they're poverty-stricken. There's no prosperity gospel going on there. Why is that? Why are the believers in one of the richest cities in the world among the poorest people ever? I think it goes back to what we took a look at in the opening sequence. That emperor worship had started voluntarily, but under Domitian, it had become mandatory. Once a year, every citizen of the empire would have to go into a place of Caesar worship and take a pinch of incense and throw it onto the altar and declare that Caesar is the same status of any of the other gods. Now, this isn't a problem if you're already a multi-god worshiper, right? I worshiped 57 gods last year. What's 58? Not a big deal. Make sense? Not a big deal if you're a person of integrity. It's also not a financial block because the incense was free. You just walked in, picked up a piece, threw it onto the altar, made the declaration, and in return, you got a certificate that said that the representatives of the emperor, in this particular case, Serenus and Hermas, have seen you sacrificing. And with that certificate, you were given the full right to conduct your affairs in the empire until the next year. Now, let's be fair. Not everybody really believed the emperor to be divine. It was more of a pledge of allegiance that took a form that everybody but Christians could follow. The Jews were given a special exemption, which is why any Christians who could claim to be Jews would often do that, fall under the exemption list. And I want to also make something really clear here while we're on this note. Roman Christians who were persecuted were not persecuted for being Christian. They were persecuted for not worshiping the emperor. They were persecuted for failure to acknowledge Caesar as a deity. And whenever something bad would happen in the empire, well, it must be because the gods are not happy. Why aren't the gods happy? The gods are not happy because somebody's not worshiping. Who's not worshiping? It's the Christians. Okay, we got to do something about that. So every time there'd be a major earthquake, right? Tornado, tsunami, natural disaster, gods must not be happy. What are we going to do in response to make sure that the gods are happy? We need to do something about this issue with the Christians. Not because they believe in Jesus. You got people throughout the empire that believe in all kinds of things because they won't worship the emperor. Now here's where we need to pause, because I don't think that imperial worship is a problem for us today. I don't think any of us are secretly going off and taking a pinch of incense and declaring that the Caesars of the Roman Empire were in fact deity. But I do want to emphasize this point while we're still on it. Does our culture care if we worship Jesus as long as we love something else more than we love Jesus? No, they don't. They don't care what we say about Jesus as long as we love the job more, as long as we love money more, as long as we love family more. Dare say it, as long as we love politics more, or country, or sports, or hobby, or something else along those lines. As long as we're willing to put something else first, culture doesn't care where we stand about Jesus. I don't think that dynamic has changed. The problem ensues when we say Jesus is the first love. Nothing else comes before that. Period. Non-negotiable. And now we've created a line in the sand. Nobody cares. Nobody cares if the Romans love Jesus, as long as they'll acknowledge the emperor first. Nobody cares. But those who were dedicated, those who were committed, what's the one thing they cannot do? If we are dedicated, if we are committed, if we are genuine in our faith, what is the one thing we cannot do? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So, what did a Christian in Smyrna do? Because a Christian in Smyrna had a difficult set of consequences, a difficult set of issues. If you live in a rural community, can you go weeks, days, months at a time without discussing politics if you live in a rural community? Absolutely. What if you live on a main street in Washington, D.C.? Is it much more difficult now? I submit to you that it is. Well, what happens if you live in a center of Caesar worship? Isn't it harder to conceal the fact that you yourself are not a Caesar worshiper? Isn't that harder to hide? So, how does a Christian obtain a certificate? How do you do this to have peace for the next year? Well, we know from church history that with variations on a theme, these were about the four major ways. First of all, some Christians would offer an insincere sacrifice to Caesar. I went in, I threw the incense on the altar, I got my certificate, but I didn't really mean it. I did it, but I didn't mean it. Or you could bribe a Roman official. I'm not going to sacrifice, but I'll pay you on the side for one of those slips of paper. Did bribery work? Sure. You could obtain a forgery. I know a guy who writes these things up. Can obtain a clever forgery. Or if you're someone like John the Apostle, can John the Apostle do any one of these three? Can John offer an insincere sacrifice to Caesar and say that's what we should do? Can John offer bribery to a Roman official and say that's what we should do? Could John obtain a forgery and say that's what we should do? No, so what does a guy like John do? Yeah, live without it. Live without it. Put our trust in God. Live without it. But if you do 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can find yourself as an easy target for advantage. What happens once you've bribed an official and the official knows you're not a real worshiper? You don't really mean it. What happens if you obtain a forgery and you get caught? What happens? What happens? Are you an easy target for someone to take advantage of and drain resources from? Hence, I know your poverty. This is why in the richest city, in one of the richest cities in the empire, you have Christians who are among the poorest groups because they're easily taken advantage of. It explains the poverty. And then what does Jesus say to this group? He says, be faithful unto death. Because when taken to its extreme, that's the ultimate price. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. The ultimate price when things are carried to extremes. Whenever a society plunges into they, them versus we and us, isn't this risk always on the forefront? That extreme payment may be extracted from the theys, from the thems, because they're a threat to we. They're a threat to us. And that's how the Romans perceived it. Jesus says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. And I think the inverse is clearly implied. The one who does not conquer will be hurt by the second death. If you give in to Rome, if you give in to the worship, if you give in, you give up the protection of the cross. I think that's the message. Now, it's interesting to note that the message concludes there. He who has an ear, let him hear. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. I think that John is confident. I think that John is confident that the Christians in Smyrna are going to do what? They're going to be conquerors. They're going to continue. Now, was the church in Smyrna perfect? Were they without problem? Were they without difficulties? Were they free from any internal conflicts? Did they never have disputes about what temperature the worship center should be, or the color of the carpet, or what color we should paint something, or what should be the pastor's day off? Or were they totally free from these types of things? Of course not, because they're people. But they had put their efforts into the right things, worshiping in trueness the love of Jesus Christ, acknowledging him with 100% commitment. Jesus is the Christ, the risen Son of God, period. And what's the indictment Jesus has against them? Did you notice? Last week we saw that the Ephesians were told, you've forgotten your first love. Go back to that. What does Jesus tell these people that they need to undo? They need to get over. They need to correct. Nothing. There's no criticism here. There were definitely problems in the church. We've admitted that. They would admit it. Yeah, got into an argument last week, shouldn't have gotten into. Lost my temper. Oops. But they got the big rocks in first. They put into their faith the most important thing. Jesus is the Christ. Whatever it costs us, Jesus is the Christ. Whatever we have to give up, Jesus is the Christ. Whatever the penalty or the punishment may be, Jesus is the Christ. No fault is found. It's not because they're perfect, but they got the big thing right. Jesus is the Christ. 100%, without fail, the risen Son of God. So what's the lesson for Smyrna today? And don't we want to be that congregation? Don't we want to be that congregation that, should Jesus tarry, we hear individually. Should he not, we hear corporately one day when he returns in the clouds. Don't we want to be that body that hears, well done, good and faithful servants, come enter into your rest, with no criticism, because we got the centrality of the gospel right. Jesus is the Christ. What's the lesson? I think there's a few things for us to take away. First, remember that Satan is a very real enemy. Satan's a real enemy. Satan was mentioned twice in the message. Twice the Smyrnans were reminded. Synagogue of Satan, the devil's about to cause some difficulty for many of you. 10 days. Satan is very real. Satan causes very real difficulty and puts very real stumbling blocks in front of God's people. Also, remain faithful. Faithful in knowing, loving, and serving Jesus Christ. Put the emphasis on the big thing. Faithful in knowing Jesus. Faithful in loving Jesus. Faithful in serving Jesus. You know, things that are going to matter in eternity. And the things that aren't going to matter in eternity, I'm not saying that they're not worth discussion, because they most certainly are. But we need to keep the big thing, the big thing. Keep the main thing, the main thing. Focus on the truth. And the other stuff is going to lose its value either now or later anyway. Focus on the main thing. And then don't be intimidated by the enemy. Don't be intimidated. One of my most famous, favorite accounts from, I think it's Fox's book of Christian martyrs. His histories have different accounts of people paying the ultimate price for their belief in Jesus and the victory of the cross. My favorite, boy, I'm losing my ability to recall names from the top of my head, but my favorite is the saint who was being burned alive for his belief in Jesus and famously said, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." It was really sad. I love that. But there have been others who were threatened with death. Death if you don't renounce. And their response was, and then what? And then what? And then what? Death is the worst thing you've got to offer, and I know the Lord of life. What fear do I have of what man can do? That's fantastic. Now, when Domitian passed and Nerva came to be emperor, the church had a dilemma on its hands. What do we do with brothers and sisters who now want to reconnect to the church, but we know they did one of those things? We know that they either offered insincere worship. I didn't mean it. We know that they bribed an official. We know that they got a forgery. What do we do with those people when they want to come back? They want to connect to the body of faith. What do we do? And the believers met and discussed it. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus have us do? And the church's conclusion was, we need to restore those who weaken under intense pressure. Restore them, receive them, forgive them. Because are there people today as brothers and sisters in Christ who may weaken under intense pressure? You can love Jesus all you want as long as you love something else more. Love the money, love your job, love your family members. As long as you love something else more, we don't care how much you love Jesus. Does that pressure still present itself today? Yes. And what do we do when those individuals come back to the body of Christ? We say, welcome. We love you. We are glad that you are here, walking with us as we travel this life together. And I believe that those are the lessons we have today from the church in Smyrna. It's interesting to me that there's no letter to Smyrna in the New Testament. You can't open the Bible to First Smyrnans, Smyrnians. I don't even know what you call people from Smyrna, right? Because we don't have a book, right? All we have is this message. All we have is this message. But it encourages us to the full. Put Jesus first. Live with Jesus first. And the power of the cross and the provision of the Holy Spirit will be with us every step of the way, regardless of what that path becomes. And nobody is in heaven today saying, I paid too high a price to be here. Nobody. But I'm certain that there are people separated from God for all eternity saying, I wish I'd have known. I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known. Thankfully, we can come to the Lord's table today, celebrating the fact that we are connected to Him, not only today, but for all eternity to come. And isn't that a fantastic thing to celebrate at the table of our Lord Jesus Christ this morning?